Hello, thanks for listening to the FLP, the Finance Leadership Podcast, your fortnightly focus on the latest information and news about the Finance Leadership Programme pathway to your CGMA qualification. It's produced by AICPA and CIMA together as the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants. You can find out more at aicpa.org and cimaglobal.com. I'm Kevin Gormley. I'm based in Northern Ireland and I'm here today to talk about the CGMA Finance Leadership Programme and the assessment models that we use. Today we're speaking with Colin Ward, who's a Senior Manager in Assessments and Product Development within the Association. And Colin, just would like you to introduce yourself, please, and tell us a little bit what you do within the Association.
Sure. My name is Colin Ward, Senior Manager working with CIMA and the Association. I have a number of different responsibilities, but one of my main ones is to look after the assessment, both in terms of design and implementing the design of assessment for the FLP.
First of all, what we'd like to talk about is program structure. So how students progress through the platform, what they can expect, and generally how the assessment program is structured within FLP.
Sure. The first thing to do, obviously, is to talk about, as you say, how the program itself is structured. And I'll be honest, every time I'm asked this question, I never quite know whether I should start from the top and work my way down or from the bottom and work my way up. But I'm going to start at the bottom, the most granular piece of content that we have. It's called the topic. So across the entire program, we're going to talk about the FLP from operational level through to strategic level. Across the FLP, there are about 300 topics. They're the most granular piece of content that we have within the platform and within the program of learning. Roughly speaking, there are about 100 of these topics per level. It's not quite even. There's slightly more, I think, in strategic level, slightly fewer than 100 in operational level, but more or less 100 each across the levels. So within each topic, this is where you pick up your most granular piece of learning. It's where we kind of impart on you as a student those pieces of knowledge and bits of skills that you need at that most focused level in order to take it forward. So each topic, just to put it into context, again, they're not all the same, but we try and make sure that they're roughly of equal size, just so students can kind of plan out their learning workload and so forth. So they're about 30 minutes to complete each. So that gives you a kind of a sense of how large the program is. It is a significant undertaking, but hopefully with each one being relatively bite-sized, a student can even quite modestly do one or two perhaps a day if they so choose. So that's the most granular level. It's a topic. And I'll talk a little bit later about how the assessment fits into it. Next up then we have skill sets. And skill sets are really just an accumulation of topics. And there's usually about, say, 4 to 5 topics per skill set. So for example, if we look at the management accounting area of the FLP, which is obviously one of the main parts of the CGMA program, usually skill sets relate to specific quite granular skills or, again, pieces of knowledge that you need to have. So, for example, a skill set could be to be able to produce quantitative analysis or to apply cost and profit analysis for organizations. So things like that. So they're kind of often tangible skills, things that you need to know or things that you need to be able to do as a finance professional. So that's the skill set. And then we move on to the competency area. Now, the competency area, again, is another aggregate of the topics and the skill sets. They're quite substantial pieces of learning. Again, they will often encompass something that you might do in the workplace, so something you'd almost talk about to colleagues. Again, as a finance professional, this is something that I do. This is a role that I have within my organization. So it could be something, again, if we look at management accounting as a specific area, it could be something like looking at cost accounting, budgeting and planning, short-term decision-making, quite substantial tasks or aspects of the finance professional's role. So that's the competency area. And there are about 12 or 13 competency areas across the entire program. So about 3 to 4 for each level of the program. Just to say, for those who may be familiar with the CIMA professional qualification syllabus, we use different terminology for the FLP, but the structure is more or less the same. So if you look at one of the subjects, say E1, P2, etc., those are made up of sections, and those sections correspond very closely to our competency areas. And the most granular aspect of the syllabus, the component outcomes, they relate almost identically to our topics. So that's the structure of the program. That's what you're actually undertaking. When you start on day one, you go in and you do a topic. We usually guide you through. You can jump around if you choose. We suggest that you kind of follow our pathway through. But if you start, and the average student will probably start on the operational level, then you're going to start on a topic. You're going to get that first piece of learning. It may be introductory in nature. There may not actually be assessment for your first topic if it is just setting some context for you. But in terms then of the assessment itself, most of the assessment happens at the topic level. We have different types of assessment within the FLP, and they all have different purposes. So there's two main types, and I'm not going to bore you with the jargon or terminology, but one is summative, which we use to make a decision about the student's capabilities, about their proficiency, and another is formative, which we use to actually drive learning. So it's not about making a judgment on the student's proficiency, it's about helping them to get better, to understand more about what it is that they're learning. So at the topic level, which as I say is the most granular piece of learning, and this is the 300 pieces across the whole platform, we will assess about 75% of those topics. And we use that called TLAs, or topic level assessments. Basically, it's a series of questions that you take per topic, and these are summative. In other words, we make a decision on you. You have to pass these questions in order to proceed. So you move through each topic. And again, the way that this kind of works is that if you're doing a couple of topics per day in terms of your learning, you can actually assess yourself or do the assessments as you proceed. So it's a kind of a continuous assessment model through that. And it allows you to kind of move as you learn rather than have this big exam, 3 months, 6 months into the future that you need to work for.
That is one of the key things, Colin, that I think is important to emphasize, that because our assessment model is very iterative and bite-sized, it does afford the student to do the assessments on a real lifestyle-friendly way. So from working with students and obviously listening to some of the feedback we've received, what they've introduced into their working day is, I'll do some assessment in the morning, lunchtime, maybe at the end of the working day. They then still have the work-life balance to manage part-time study and full-time work. So I think that's really important and that you've touched on, and just to re-emphasize that.
I think that's absolutely right. I think we'll probably touch on this a little bit more as we talk through some of the other assessment types and so on. But what I would say as an assessment professional is that there is no such thing as the perfect assessment, and that assessment is very contextual, if you like. In other words, you have to shape your assessment based on partly on student needs, partly on obviously the needs of the qualification, what you want to say about somebody who's completed it. So when we think of some of the comparisons that we have with the CIMA professional qualification, and primarily with the OTQ exams that people do for each subject. So you do your E1, your P1, your F1 OTQ exams in order to progress to the case study. Well, obviously that element isn't part of the FLP. Instead, it's this continuous assessment model through the topics. But just to be clear about it, there is no absolute right or wrong way to do it. These are very different assessment models because they need to be different. And because our students who are working through the FLP require this more iterative, as you say, approach to work through their assessment. So just to put that into context, there's a lot more assessment in the FLP. So you don't get a shortcut by not doing the OTQ exams. But that doesn't mean that it's necessarily better. It's just different. As I said, the idea behind the FLP is to provide students with a different approach that may work for them, a different alternative that may work better for them and their lifestyle. But we're not really making a kind of a judgment as to say one approach is better than the other. They're both equally valid in their own ways.
I guess that's a very important point as well, is with the introduction of FLP as an alternative pathway to get CGMA qualified, what we've essentially done as a professional body is introduce choice for students to select the pathway that suits their learning style, their work-life balance, and other factors that may be important to those students. So yeah, it does give students that option now that they didn't have before, and lots obviously will choose either pathway. One point I was just going to mention, Colin, is around the case study and how that's viewed as a way of assessment in terms of its importance to the overall level. Could you give us some insight into how that it works in the overall assessment model?
Sure. So I think I mentioned earlier on that we have different types of assessment within the FLP that serve different purposes. And this is perfectly normal educational experience. So we have that part of the assessment, which we call summative, which is just one of those jargon words, but really all it means is that we're kind of making a judgment on you and as a student in terms of your proficiency. So that happens at the topic level. We then have other forms of assessment, which we call formative, which in essence is about preparing you as a student, getting you used to working in different ways, putting together those most granular pieces of learning into something that you can actually use tangibly in real life. So when we think of the case study exam, we think of this really quite significant exam. It happens, there are three of them for the most part. So they'll happen one at operational level, one at management, and one at strategic. The role and purpose of the case study exam in becoming CGMA hasn't changed at all. In other words, all students who do the FLP will, if they're starting at operational level, they must go on and do the operational level case study as they will for management level and strategic level in order to complete in exactly the same way as the more traditional pathway. Really, all we're doing is providing, as you say, this kind of different pathway that will converge with the case study exam. So in terms of what the case study exam is still, it is the ultimate determinant of your competence as a CGMA. That's at the strategic level, but also at each of the levels before it. So when an FLP student takes a case study exam, it really doesn't matter whether they've done the FLP or whether they've come through the traditional pathway. We're making the same decision about them, that if they pass, they are competent at this level, that they are ready to complete the program, or they are ready to move on to the next level. So that in that sense, the case study hasn't changed at all. And what we're trying to do really is bring students through to the case study exam. And we do that through those TLA questions at the topic level. And then through our formative assessment, we're beginning to try and introduce some of those skills and ideas that are necessary to actually undertake the case study exam, to put together your learning in a coherent way. And that happens too within the FLP program.
Yeah, it's a very comprehensive assessment model that within FLP and suits a lot of students so far from my experience. In terms of studying for the case study or any of the level learning, would a student need additional learning or resources?
Yes, they will. So just to take a little step back for a moment and talk a little bit more about the formative assessment, but just to be very clear with students in terms of what the stages going through are. So within the FLP itself, the main formative assessment, this assessment model is actually not really there to assess you as such, but to help you with your learning. They're called business simulation assignments, or BSAs, and they happen at the competency area level. So there's about 11 of them per level, so about 33 of them in total. They each take about 30 minutes to do. You don't have to pass them. The whole point of this is not to actually pass them. We don't make any judgment on you on the basis of them. Instead, it's about giving you a real world task. We put you into a position within a kind of a dummy employer. We say, this is you, this is your role, this is what you've been asked to do. Here's the context in which this is happening. This is what you need to understand. And this is what's been asked of you, what you need to actually complete. But at each step of the way through, we give you information that will help you set the context. So it could be about the organization. Again, it's about maybe a real world situation in terms of what's happening with the economy, what's happening in generally. It allows you to make decisions and to bring together those granular pieces of learning that you have. And it's really the first step towards being able to compound that learning, bring it together, aggregate it, understand more complex ideas and complete more complex tasks with this granular learning. So some people have described it as a little bit as like mini case study. And that's not really what we're trying to do. Instead, we're trying to get students to think a little bit that if I have this little bit of knowledge that I got from this topic, and then I've got this skill or other piece of knowledge from this other topic in this other area, how can I combine them together to complete this particular task? So the one thing with the BSAs is that at all steps of the way, if you need guidance, there's actual guidance in there. You can engage with it. You can choose not to if you want to go through. We call the guidance, we call it B. And B is this individual who'll kind of step in and give you tips or hints and try and kind of point you in the right direction, much like a helpful colleague might. At each task, you're not marked on it. Instead, you get feedback, and you get really kind of strong feedback telling you if you chose this option, that could be a good option, but it's maybe not the best option. Or this is the wrong option. Maybe you should have gone here. It's trying to be constructive. There's no such thing as really a wrong answer, because even if you choose wrongly, you'll still get good feedback from it. They happen quite regularly, and you do lots of them. You don't have to pass them. We say, and we mean this is the key purpose, is that even if you got each of the tasks within the BSA wrong, you should still come out with additional confidence, feeling that if I encountered that again, and you can do a BSA again if you choose, but if I encountered that again, either in this environment or in real life, I'd know more about what the right steps were, what I should do. So to kind of step back again and look at your question in relation to the case study exam, the short answer is, yeah, you need a lot more resources and learning to be able to undertake a case study exam. For many of our students, a case study exam might be alien to them. They've never done anything quite so structured and significant before. They may have done long exams. They may have been multiple choice questions for the most part. But to actually sit and structure a series of paragraphs to complete a significant task, to think about your pre-seen material, that content that puts you in that scenario and that context that you need to know, it's a significant thing. So there are skills and resources that are needed specifically just for doing the case study exam above and beyond what it is that you're actually learning to be in terms of management accounting and to be a finance professional. So the BSA and each of the BSAs across the FLP, they're designed to introduce some of those concepts around how you structure things, how you think more broadly, how you pull together those different strands of learning and actually complete a bigger task. But once you complete a level of the FLP, whether operational, management or strategic, we highly recommend, we couldn't recommend enough that you go on and do the case study review course for that. There you'll get those additional skills and needed. You'll get prompted in terms of what you need to do, how you need to structure your responses and so forth. You absolutely won't get any tips on the exam. I'm really sorry about that, but you will get some great guidance in terms of how you actually respond to and complete an exam of this nature.
Yeah, that's a very valid point, Colin, in terms of the case study preparation. I would draw a very close correlation between people who fully complete the case study review course and those who pass. So very important you follow the steps within that in terms of learning your core activities. So a review of the level learning, your understand and analysis of pre-seen, your mock exams, and attending the webinars that really step through a full analysis of the pre-seen material with an intention of trying to understand the likely scenarios and triggers that will happen when you go in and sit your exam. Thank you very much, Colin, for that detail on the assessment. Hopefully that helps people fully understand what and how they will approach the learning and the assessment under the FLP programme. So that's a good place to wrap up our conversation today. There's plenty more to explore about this topic. For more on the FLP programme itself, go to enroll.cgma.org. Thanks again to Colin, of course, and thank you for listening. If you know a friend or colleague who would use this information, feel free to share it with your networks. You'll see the sharing button on the podcast app. That's it for now. Keep an eye out for our next episode, which should be available in a couple of weeks. We'll help you keep on track to your CGMA. Thanks for listening.
This podcast is designed to provide illustrative information with respect to the subject matter covered and does not represent an official opinion or position of the AICPA or AICPA.org. It is provided with the understanding that the AICPA and AICPA.org are not engaged in offering legal, accounting, or other professional service. If such advice or expert assistance is required, the services of a competent professional person should be sought. The AICPA and AICPA.org make no representations, warranties, or guarantees as to, and assume no responsibility for, the content or application of the material contained herein, and especially disclaim all liability for any damages arising out of the use of, reference to, or reliance on such material.